The discovery that fundamentally changed our understanding of Spanish conquistador expeditions in the American Southwest began beneath a collapsed irrigation ditch on a failing cattle ranch in rural Arizona. It's all set in motion by one man's desperate attempt to save his family's century-old ranch while honoring his uncle's dying wish, a chance discovery that would eventually bring Pentagon officials to his remote property, trigger classified briefings at the Department of Defense, and ultimately reveal a secret Spanish expedition that had been deliberately erased from history books for nearly 500 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The ancient Ford pickup truck groaned in protest as Jake Rodriguez guided it across the sun-baked pasture, dust clouds billowing behind the worn tires. At 26, the former agricultural engineering student had never imagined himself wrestling with drought-resistant cattle breeds and crumbling ranch infrastructure. Yet here he was, squinting against the relentless Arizona sun as he surveyed land that had been slowly dying for the past 3 years. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," he muttered, adjusting his sweat-stained baseball cap as the truck's engine sputtered threateningly before resuming its labored crawl. This particular section of the 240-acre ranch, a remote corner bordered by weathered stone foundations that his Uncle Carlos had always called the Old Spanish Ruins, was proving especially challenging to maintain. The Rodriguez family's Triple R ranch sat in a valley between the Superstition Mountains and the Salt River, where the desert met what had once been fertile farmland. 4 generations of his family had worked this harsh but beautiful landscape, each leaving their mark through sweat, determination, and an intimate understanding of how to coax life from unforgiving soil. 6 months ago, Jake had been completing his master's degree in sustainable agriculture at Arizona State University, his thesis on water-efficient farming techniques finally gaining recognition from professors and industry professionals.
Nice.
Research focused on innovative irrigation systems that could reduce water consumption by up to 40%, while maintaining crop yields, work that was attracting attention from agricultural companies across the Southwest. Then came the devastating phone call that changed everything. "Jake, you need to come home immediately." His mother's voice had cracked through the phone at 2 a.m. on a cold February morning. "Uncle Carlos, ... He had a massive heart attack while checking the cattle. Paramedics did everything they could. But the funeral had been held on a crisp March day, with the entire small community of Saguaro Springs turning out to honor a man who had been a pillar of local ranching culture for over 40 years. Carlos Rodriguez had never married, dedicating his life entirely to the land and cattle that had been in the family since his grandfather had homesteaded the property in 1889. What shocked everyone, including Jake, was the reading of the will 3 days later. "To my nephew Jake Rodriguez, who alone among my family has shown genuine passion for both the land's history and its agricultural potential. I leave my entire ranch property, livestock, and all associated assets," the lawyer had read in a steady, the voice that couldn't disguise the magnitude of what was being transferred. "It is my hope that he will find a way to honor both our family's legacy and the deeper secrets this land holds." The deeper secrets reference had puzzled everyone present, but Jake understood. Uncle Carlos had always been the family storyteller, the keeper of local folklore and family history that stretched back to the earliest Spanish settlements in the region. "This land holds secrets, mijo," Uncle Carlos used to tell him during summer visits spent learning traditional ranching methods and listening to stories under star-filled desert skies. "The old Spanish explorers came through here centuries ago, searching for cities of gold. My grandfather used to find strange metal objects when he was plowing, coins and tools that didn't look like anything the American settlers would have used." The old man would pause dramatically, his weathered face serious in the firelight, before continuing. "Some say they found more than they bargained for. That's why those stone foundations in the back section near Devil's Canyon ... I never disturb them. Some things are meant to stay buried, but others ... others are waiting for the right person to understand their significance." As a child, Jake had been fascinated by his uncle's mysterious hints about hidden Spanish treasure and ancient secrets. The stories had sparked his interest in history and archaeology. leading to undergraduate courses in both subjects alongside his engineering studies. As an adult facing the crushing reality of inheriting a property with $180,000 in accumulated debt, failed equipment, and a mortgage 3 months behind in payments, Jake viewed those childhood stories through a much different lens. The inheritance had initially seemed like a blessing, connection into his Mexican-American heritage and a chance to apply his agricultural education to land his family had worked for generations. Uncle Carlos had been remarkably successful. During the 1990s and early 2000s, when cattle prices were strong and the ranch had thrived, but the last decade had been brutal, with drought conditions, falling commodity prices, and the rising costs of feed and veterinary care slowly draining the operation's financial reserves. That romantic notion of continuing the family legacy had quickly collided with harsh financial reality when Jake met with the ranch's longtime accountant, Mrs. Henderson, a week after the funeral. "Your uncle was too proud to ask for help," she had explained, spreading financial documents across her desk with the careful precision of someone delivering bad news. "The drought of 2019 killed most of the spring calves, and he had to sell the breeding stock at a loss just to pay the feed bills. Then the well pump failed last summer, and the irrigation system hasn't been properly maintained in years." Numbers were staggering. The ranch house needed a new roof after hail damage the previous spring. The barn required structural repairs after a monsoon storm had weakened the foundation. The cattle operation was running at a loss, with feed costs exceeding income by nearly $3,000 per month. Most critically, the property taxes and mortgage payments had fallen behind during Uncle Carlos's final illness, creating an immediate threat of foreclosure. "Honestly, Jake," Mrs. Henderson had said gently, "unless you can find a way to generate significant income quickly or inject substantial capital into the operation, you're looking at bankruptcy within 6 months." Jake's agricultural engineering background gave him a clear understanding of the ranch's potential. The land was well suited for sustainable agriculture techniques, with diverse soil types and microclimates that could support everything from drought-resistant crops to specialized livestock operations. His master's thesis research had identified specific opportunities for properties exactly like this, one implementing precision irrigation, diversifying into high-value crops, and developing agritourism revenue streams. But every solution required capital that he didn't have. His savings from graduate school assistantships and part-time consulting work totaled less than $15,000. It's barely enough to cover 1 month's operating expenses for the ranch. "You're crazy to keep that money pit, Jake," his girlfriend Maria had insisted during what became their final serious conversation about the future. She was an environmental lawyer with a promising career in Phoenix, and the idea of him abandoning his educational achievements to play cowboy on a failing ranch struck her as complete irresponsibility. "Sell it to Sunset Desert Developments," she had argued, referring to the Phoenix-based company that had been making increasingly generous offers to purchase the property. "They're offering $2.8 million to subdivide it into luxury desert homes. That's enough to pay off all the debt, fund your PhD program, and still have money left over for a house in Scottsdale." The advice was undeniably practical. Sunset Desert Developments had been persistent in their interest, with their representative calling monthly to increase the offer. The Phoenix metropolitan area was expanding rapidly, and properties like the Triple R Ranch were increasingly valuable as sites for upscale residential developments targeting wealthy retirees seeking authentic desert living experiences. Yet something about selling felt like betrayal. The weathered ranch buildings with their view of distant red mesas, the way morning light painted shadows across pastures his great-grandfather had first fenced, the centuries-old stone foundations that Uncle Carlos had always treated with mysterious reverence. It all represented connections that the argument had ended their relationship, but it had also crystallized Jake's determination. Despite the financial pressure threatening to crush him, despite the practical voices urging him to sell, he had made his choice. He took a leave of absence from his consulting work, liquidated his modest investment account, and threw himself into an intensive effort to save the ranch through modern, sustainable agriculture techniques. The first 3 months had been a crash course in ranching reality. Jake discovered that understanding irrigation engineering in theory was very different from repairing a broken pump at 5 a.m. while cattle waited for water. His precision agriculture concepts seemed almost laughable when applied to equipment that predated GPS technology by several decades. But slowly, progress emerged. He had negotiated payment plans with major creditors, secured a small loan using his pickup truck as collateral, and implemented water-saving irrigation modifications that reduced monthly utility costs by nearly 30%. More importantly, he had developed a business plan for transitioning portions of the ranch to high-value specialty crops that could generate substantially more income per acre than traditional cattle operations. The plan was ambitious but feasible. Convert 40 acres to organic vegetable production, targeting the growing farm-table restaurant market in Phoenix. Develop a small-scale agritourism operation offering authentic ranching experiences, and maintain a reduced cattle herd focused on premium grass-fed beef sales directly to consumers. Implementation, however, required infrastructure improvements that strained both his financial resources and his optimism. The irrigation system needed complete modernization, requiring trenching across areas of the ranch that hadn't been disturbed in decades, which brought him to this scorching June morning, attempting to repair a section of irrigation ditch that supplied water to the back pastures where he planned to establish the organic vegetable operation. The ancient Ford pickup truck continued its struggle across the uneven terrain. Loaded with PVC pipe, shovels, and the portable trenching equipment he had rented for the week. This particular section of the ranch, bordered by what Uncle Carlos had called the Old Spanish Ruins, was the most remote and challenging to access. The stone foundations had always intrigued Jake. Unlike the typical ranch boundary markers, or building foundations from the American homestead period, these structures showed sophisticated construction techniques that seemed inconsistent with 19th century ranching operations. Uncle Carlos had always been mysteriously protective of the area, warning Jake as a child never to disturb the stones or dig near them. "Those stones are old, mijo, older than our family's time here," the old man had explained during one of their walks across the property. "They mark something important, something that was here long before the Americans, long before even the Mexican period. When I was a boy, my grandfather told me they were markers left by Spanish treasure hunters, men who came through here centuries ago looking for gold and silver." At the time, Jake had assumed these were just colorful family stories, the kind of folklore that accumulated around old properties in regions with rich pre-American history. But Uncle Carlos had always spoken with a seriousness that suggested deeper knowledge. "One day, when you're older and understand the responsibility that comes with this land, I'll tell you more," his uncle had promised. "There are things buried here that could change our family's future, but they require wisdom to handle properly." That conversation had taken place when Jake was 15, during what turned out to be his last extended summer visit before college. Uncle Carlos had died before sharing whatever secrets he had hinted at, leaving only the enigmatic reference in his will to the deeper secrets this land holds. Now, as Jake surveyed the irrigation route that would necessarily pass near the stone foundations, he found himself wondering if his uncle's stories contained more truth than folklore. The ranching operation needed every possible advantage to survive, and if there were historical artifacts or resources on the property that could generate additional income, couldn't afford to ignore them out of superstition. The truck suddenly jolted violently as the front wheel dropped into what appeared to be a sinkhole that had opened in the irrigation ditch. The impact nearly threw Jake from his seat, sending tools flying across the truck bed and causing the engine to stall with a final, dramatic gasp. "Damn it," he muttered, climbing out to assess the damage. The front wheel was buried almost to the axle in loose soil and broken stone that had apparently collapsed into an underground void, expecting another of the countless maintenance problems that seemed to multiply faster than he could solve them. Jake began clearing debris from around the tire. What he found instead stopped him cold. The sinkhole hadn't formed due to erosion or structural failure. The truck had broken through into what was clearly a deliberately constructed underground chamber. The stones surrounding the opening weren't randomly placed rocks but carefully fitted blocks, showing the same sophisticated construction techniques he had observed in the mysterious foundations. "What the hell?" Jake murmured, kneeling to examine the opening more carefully. Uncle Carlos had never mentioned any underground structures in this section of the property, and there were no historical records of cellars or storage facilities in this remote area. The construction was unlike anything he had seen on the ranch before. The stones were fitted with precision that required skilled craftsmanship, and the chamber appeared to be lined with what looked like hand-cut sandstone blocks. Most intriguingly, the opening revealed symbols carved into the stone, not the simple marks of ranch hands or homesteaders, but elaborate designs that looked distinctly Spanish colonial. Grabbing his powerful LED flashlight from the truck's emergency kit, Jake peered into the chamber. The beam revealed a space approximately 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep, with what appeared to be a stone shelf or altar at the far end. The construction showed remarkable preservation, suggesting it had been sealed and protected from the elements for a very long time. His engineering training had taught Jake to approach unexpected structural discoveries with methodical caution rather than impulsive exploration. Underground chambers could contain dangerous gases, unstable construction, or environmental hazards that required proper safety procedures. But this discovery on his own family's land, particularly given Uncle Carlos's mysterious hints about buried secrets, stirred something deeper than professional curiosity. After ensuring the surrounding stones wouldn't collapse further and testing the air quality with a simple lighter flame, Jake carefully widened the opening enough to examine the chamber more thoroughly. The stone shelf held what appeared to be a wrapped bundle, preserved by the dry climate and protection from moisture. With careful movements, he reached into the chamber and retrieved the bundle. It was surprisingly heavy, wrapped in what felt like oiled leather that had maintained remarkable flexibility despite obvious age. The wrapping showed detailed toolwork, decorative stitching, and brass hardware that suggested both significant value and considerable age. In the brilliant Arizona sunlight, Jake could see the bundle was actually a leather portfolio or document case, approximately 15 inches long and secured with original rawhide bindings that had been treated with some kind of preservative. The craftsmanship was unmistakably Spanish colonial, with hand-tooled decorative elements and metalwork that he recognized from a museum. Displays about early southwestern exploration. Jake's heart raced as he carefully worked the ancient bindings. The leather had maintained surprising flexibility, and the rawhide ties yielded with gentle pressure. Inside, protected from the elements by the sealed container and stone chamber, lay what appeared to be hand-drawn maps and documents on thick parchment, remarkably preserved despite their obvious antiquity. With the methodical care his engineering background demanded, he gently examined the top document. The parchment was thick and substantial, showing none of the brittleness he might have expected from centuries-old materials. Elegant Spanish script covered the margins in faded brown ink, surrounding what was unmistakably a detailed topographical map with geographic features he immediately recognized. Though his Spanish was conversational at best, having grown up in a bilingual household and maintained his language skills through agricultural work with Mexican immigrant laborers, Jake could make out keywords and phrases. More importantly, he recognized several geographical features on the map: mountain ranges, river systems, and distinctive mesa formations that corresponded directly to the landscape around his ranch. The date at the top, written in the same elegant script, made him stop breathing. 15 de Abril. Ano de Nostro, Center, 1542. April 15, 1542. That would place the document during the Coronado expedition, one of the earliest and most significant Spanish explorations of what would later become the American Southwest. Jake's undergraduate history courses had covered the period in detail. Francisco Vázquez de Coronado's expedition had departed Mexico in 1540, searching for the legendary 7 cities of gold, and eventually exploring vast territories across the present-day southwestern United States. Jake carefully examined the other documents in the portfolio, his excitement growing with each discovery. The collection contained not just maps, but what appeared to be detailed journals with illustrations of geological formations, careful notations about distances and landmarks and what looked like systematic records of discoveries and observations. Most intriguingly, several locations on the maps were marked with distinctive symbols crosses, combined with what looked like stylized suns and accompanied by Spanish text that included words Jake could recognize even with his limited vocabulary: oro gold, plata silver, tesoro escondido, hidden treasure, and repeated references to Minas Secreta's secret mines. One map showed remarkable detail of the area around his ranch, including geographical features that were still recognizable today. A location approximately 3 miles northeast of his current position was marked with an elaborate symbol and accompanied by text that Jake could partially translate.
Equise encuentra a la mina principal, a la mina principal, ...
Oro puro in abundancia. Escondido de los Hoyos del Verajers found the entrance to the principal mine. Pure gold in abundance, ... is hidden from the eyes of the viceroy. The implications were staggering. These appeared to be actual expedition records from one of the most famous Spanish explorations in North American history. More importantly, it seemed to document discoveries significant gold and silver deposits that had been deliberately concealed from Spanish colonial authorities. Jake's knowledge of the period told him why such concealment would have been necessary. Spanish colonial law required that all precious metal discoveries be reported to the crown. With substantial portions surrendered to royal authorities, expedition members who concealed discoveries faced severe punishment. But the potential rewards for successfully hiding valuable deposits were enormous. As he continued examining the documents, Jake realized that Uncle Carlos's childhood stories about Spanish treasure might not have been folklore after all. These appeared to be actual historical records, potentially documenting discoveries that had remained hidden for nearly 5 centuries. The ranch that had seemed like a financial burden threatening to destroy his future had just revealed a connection to history that could change everything if the documents were authentic, and if he could figure out what to do with information that had been carefully concealed for almost 500 years. The scorching Arizona sun beat down on Jake as he carefully rewrapped the documents and secured them in the truck. His mind raced with questions and possibilities. Were these documents genuine Spanish colonial records? Did they actually mark the locations of hidden treasure? And most importantly, what should he do with information that could potentially solve all his financial problems while connecting him to one of the most significant periods in southwestern history? As he worked to extract his truck from the collapsed chamber, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that Uncle Carlos had known exactly what was buried on the property. The old man's mysterious comments about secrets and his protective attitude toward the stone foundations suddenly made perfect sense. The discovery represented far more than just potential financial salvation for the ranch. These documents, if authentic, could provide unprecedented insight into Spanish colonial exploration and potentially rewrite historical understanding of the Coronado expedition's actual discoveries. But Jake also understood that such a discovery would inevitably attract attention from historians, archaeologists, and potentially government authorities. The thought of dealing with institutional bureaucracy and academic politics while trying to save his family's ranch felt overwhelming. For now, he decided the wisest course was discretion. He would research the document's authenticity through careful channels while maintaining control of both the physical artifacts and any information they contained. The ranch's survival might depend on how wisely he handled what Uncle Carlos had preserved for the right moment in their family's history. As Jake finally freed his truck and continued toward the house, the leather portfolio secure beside him, he felt a profound connection to his uncle's wisdom. Some secrets were indeed meant to stay buried until the right person understood their significance. Today, that person was him, and his family's future, along with potentially significant historical discoveries, lay in his hands. The leather portfolio felt impossibly heavy as Jake carried it into the ranch house that evening, not because of its physical weight, but because of the magnitude of what it might represent. The Spanish documents lay spread across his kitchen table, like pieces of a puzzle that could either save his family's legacy or complicate his life beyond imagination. Sleep had been impossible. Jake had spent the entire night poring over the maps and documents, using every Spanish-English dictionary and translation app he could find to decipher more of the text. By dawn, he had managed to translate enough to understand that these weren't just random colonial documents. They appeared to be detailed records of a secret mining operation that had discovered substantial gold and silver deposits in the exact area where his family had ranched for over a century. The morning brought harsh Arizona sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows and the sobering realization that his discovery presented a choice that would define not just his immediate future, but potentially the fate of his family's land for generations to come. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from his sister Alina, who lived in Phoenix and worked as a paralegal at a major law firm. Called Mom last night. She says you're still trying to make the ranch work instead of selling to those developers. Are you insane? Hey. The offer expires next month. Lena had always been the practical one in the family, the person who made decisions based on spreadsheets and cost-benefit analyses. She had supported Jake's education and respected his agricultural engineering expertise, but she viewed his decision to keep the ranch as emotional sentimentality that ignored financial reality. Another text arrived from his former roommate David, who was completing his PhD in sustainable agriculture at UC Davis. Heard about Uncle Carlos? Sorry for your loss. Hope you're not seriously considering keeping that ranch. With your qualifications, you could get research positions at any major university. Don't throw away your career for a romantic fantasy about being a cowboy. Messages represented everything logical and practical about his situation. Everyone who cared about him, everyone whose opinion he valued, was urging him to abandon the ranch and pursue the safe, sensible path that his education had prepared him for. Sell the property, pay off the debts, complete his PhD, and build a successful career in agricultural research or engineering consulting. But as Jake looked out at the morning light painting the distant red mesas with golden highlights, the same light that had illuminated this landscape when Spanish explorers first rode through these valleys nearly 5 centuries ago, he felt something deeper than financial calculation. This wasn't just about maintaining a family tradition or preserving a piece of heritage. The documents spread across his table suggested that his family's land held secrets that could change understanding of one of the most significant periods in American history. The responsible thing to do, Jake knew, was to contact academic experts who could properly authenticate the documents and ensure they received appropriate scholarly attention. But doing so would also mean losing control of both the discovery and any potential benefits it might provide for saving the ranch. His laptop sat open to the website for the Arizona Historical Society, where he had spent much of the night researching procedures for reporting historical discoveries on private property. The information was both encouraging and concerning. As the property owner, he had clear rights to artifacts discovered on his land. But significant historical discoveries often triggered academic and government interests that could complicate private ownership. Jake had also researched the Coronado expedition extensively, learning details that made his documents seem even more significant. Francisco Vázquez de Coronado's expedition has been one of the largest and most ambitious Spanish explorations of North America, involving over 300 Spanish soldiers and nearly 1,000 indigenous allies. The expedition had traveled thousands of miles across the present-day southwestern United States. But official records suggested they had found little gold or other precious metals. However, historians had long suspected that official reports might not tell the complete story. Spanish colonial law required that 20% of all precious metal discoveries be surrendered to the crown, and expedition members faced severe punishment for concealing valuable finds. This created strong incentives for successful discoveries to be hidden from official reporting. Jake's documents appeared to provide evidence of exactly such concealment. The maps and journals described multiple mining sites where oro puro, pure gold, and plata, abundant silver, had been extracted and hidden from Los Hoyos, Del Valle, the eyes of the Viceroy. More importantly, the documents provided specific location information that, could potentially lead to physical evidence of these secret operations. The implications were staggering from both historical and financial perspectives. If authentic, these documents could fundamentally change scholarly understanding of Spanish colonial exploration and provide evidence of significant mineral resources that had remained hidden for centuries. But authentication would require expert examination, and expert examination would inevitably lead to publicity, academic involvement, and potentially government interest. Jake found himself facing the same dilemma that had apparently confronted the Spanish explorers. Nearly 5 centuries earlier, the choice between reporting a significant discovery through official channels and maintaining private control of potentially valuable information. His phone rang, interrupting his morning deliberations. The caller ID showed Henderson Accounting Mrs. Henderson, the ranch's longtime accountant, calling with what he suspected would be more bad news about the financial situation. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," Jake answered, trying to sound more optimistic than he felt. "Jake, I'm afraid I have some concerning news." Her voice carried the careful tone of someone delivering information that would be difficult to hear. "I received a notice from First National Bank yesterday regarding the mortgage payments. They're initiating foreclosure proceedings unless we can bring the account current within 30 days. The news hit like a physical blow. Jake had known the mortgage was behind, but he had hoped the payment plan he had negotiated would provide more time to implement his agricultural improvements and generate additional income. "How much do we need to bring it current?" he asked, though he suspected the answer would be more than his available resources. $47,000, Mrs. Henderson replied. "That includes the missed payments, penalties, and legal fees. I've been working with their loan department, but they're not willing to extend the payment plan any further without substantial collateral or a co-signer with significant assets." Jake felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. $47,000 was more than his annual consulting income, more than the value of all his personal assets combined. The only realistic way to raise that amount quickly would be to sell the ranch to Sunset Desert Developments, exactly what everyone had been urging him to do. "There is one other option," Mrs. Henderson continued. "The development company called again yesterday. They've increased their offer to $3.2 million for the entire property. That would be enough to pay off all debts and still leave you with substantial funds for your future." The offer was generous, reflecting the strong demand for desert development sites near Phoenix. Jake could pay off all the ranch's debts, complete his PhD without financial stress, and still have enough money to purchase a comfortable home wherever his career took him. It was the practical, sensible solution that would solve all his immediate problems. But as he looked at the Spanish documents spread across his kitchen table, Jake realized that accepting the development offer would also mean surrendering what might be one of the most significant historical discoveries in the American Southwest. The developers would bulldoze the stone foundations, destroy any archaeological evidence, and build luxury homes over sites that might contain centuries-old mining operations. "Mrs. Henderson, I need a few days to consider my options," Jake said. "Finally, can you contact the bank and request a brief extension while I explore some possibilities?" "I'll try, but don't get your hopes up," she replied. "They've been very clear that they want resolution quickly. Jake, I hope you'll seriously consider the development offer. I know this ranch means a lot to you, but sometimes the practical choice is the right choice." After ending the call, Jake sat in the kitchen silence, feeling the weight of competing obligations and opportunities. The financial pressure was undeniable. He needed $47,000 within 30 days to save the ranch, and he had no realistic way to raise that amount through conventional means. But the documents before him suggested possibilities that went far beyond conventional solutions. If the maps were accurate, if they actually marked the locations of hidden Spanish treasure, then the ranch might contain resources that could solve its financial problems permanently. But pursuing that possibility would require time, expertise, and resources he didn't have, all while racing against a foreclosure deadline that was rapidly approaching. Jake's phone buzzed with another message, this time from Maria, heard about. "The foreclosure notice through Alina? This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. It's not too late to accept the development offer and start over. Don't let pride destroy your future. The message from his ex-girlfriend stung, because it reflected the practical wisdom that everyone in his life seemed to share. Jake was young, educated, and talented. He could build a successful career in agricultural engineering or sustainable agriculture research. Clinging to a failing ranch out of sentimental attachment to family history was, by any rational measure, a poor decision that would likely lead to financial ruin. But rationality seemed inadequate when dealing with the magnitude of what he had discovered. These documents, if authentic, represented more than just potential financial salvation for the ranch. They were direct connections to one of the most significant periods in American history, providing evidence that could change scholarly understanding of Spanish colonial exploration. More personally, they represented vindication of Uncle Carlos's mysterious stories and protective attitude toward the ranch's historical sites. The old man had apparently understood the true significance of what lay hidden on the property, and he had preserved both the physical evidence and the family's ownership of the land. Until someone emerged who could properly appreciate what had been entrusted to their care, Jake made his decision with the clarity that sometimes emerges when all alternatives have been exhausted. He would pursue authentication of the documents, but carefully and discreetly. He would research the historical context thoroughly before involving any outside experts. And he would explore the possibility that the maps might actually lead to physical evidence that could provide financial salvation for the ranch. The decision represented a commitment to uncertainty rather than safety, to possibility rather than guaranteed outcomes. But as Jake carefully rewrapped the Spanish documents and secured them in Uncle Carlos's old gun safe, he felt a sense of purpose that had been missing since he first inherited the overwhelming challenges of the ranch. His first step would be research, learning everything possible about the Coronado expedition, Spanish colonial mining techniques, and the specific geographical areas marked on the maps. His agricultural engineering background had taught him systematic, problem-solving approaches that would serve him well in historical research. Jake spent the rest of the morning creating a detailed inventory of the documents and maps, photographing each page with high-resolution digital images that would allow for detailed analysis without risking damage to the originals. His engineering training emphasized documentation and systematic analysis, skills that would be essential for understanding what he had discovered. The main map showed remarkable detail of the area around his ranch, including topographical features that were still recognizable today. Mountain ranges, river courses, distinctive mesa formations were depicted with accuracy that suggested that the cartographer had spent considerable time in the region. More importantly, the map included landmarks and distance measurements that could potentially be correlated with modern geographical references. One location, marked with an elaborate cross-and sun symbol, approximately 3 miles northeast of his current position, was accompanied by detailed text that Jake was gradually learning to translate. Aquí se encuentra la entrada principal a las minas de oro. Cavernas natros expandidas por nuestros tapajados. El tesoro está escondido en cámaras. Salidas para protección contra descubrimiento por autoridades colonias. His rough translation here is found: the principal entrance to the gold mines. Natural caverns expanded by our workers. The treasure is hidden in sealed chambers for protection against discovery by colonial authorities. The location described in the document corresponded to an area of his ranch that Jake knew well, a section of rugged terrain near Devil's Canyon, where he had often hiked as a teenager. The area contained several natural cave formations and rocky outcroppings that could potentially conceal mining operations, especially if they had been deliberately disguised or sealed. But exploring those possibilities would require time and resources that the foreclosure deadline didn't allow. Jake needed to find a way to address the immediate financial crisis while preserving the restorable opportunity to properly investigate his historical discovery. That afternoon, he called Tom Martinez, a fellow agricultural engineering graduate who had started a successful consulting business in Phoenix. Tom had occasionally offered Jake contract work on precision irrigation projects, and he might have insights about raising capital quickly. "Jake, good to hear from you," Tom's voice carried the enthusiasm of someone whose business was thriving. "How's the ranching life treating you? Still trying to turn that old place into a modern agricultural operation?" "Actually, that's why I'm calling," Jake replied carefully. "I'm facing some financial challenges with the ranch, but I've also discovered some potentially valuable historical artifacts on the property. I'm wondering if you might know about investors or partnerships that could help bridge short-term cash flow problems while I explore the historical significance of what I've found." Tom was quiet for a moment before responding. "Historical artifacts? Like Native American pottery or something? Could be valuable, but it's also complicated legally. Are you sure you want to go down that road instead of just selling to those developers who've been calling?" "Spanish colonial material," Jake explained. "It's providing just enough detail to convey significance without revealing the full scope of his discovery. Documents and maps that might have considerable historical value. But I need to keep the ranch operational while I research authentication and potential value." Spanish colonial. Tom's interest sharpened. That could be serious money if it's authentic. "I know some collectors and investors who specialize in historical acquisitions. But Jake, you'd need expert authentication before anyone would consider significant investment. And that kind of authentication takes time and money you might not have." The conversation confirmed what Jake had already understood. Pursuing the historical value of his discovery would require resources and time that his immediate financial crisis didn't allow. But Tom's mention of collectors and investors suggested possibilities that traditional agricultural financing wouldn't provide. "Here's what I'd suggest," Tom continued. "Document everything thoroughly. Get preliminary authentication from a reputable expert, and then we can discuss investor presentations. But honestly, if you're facing foreclosure, you might need to consider interim solutions that provide immediate cash flow." After ending the call, Jake realized he needed expert guidance about both the historical significance of his documents and the practical options for maintaining ownership of the ranch while pursuing authentication. The solution, he decided, was to contact academic experts who could provide preliminary assessment without triggering broader publicity or institutional involvement. Jake spent the evening researching historians and archaeologists who specialized in Spanish colonial exploration of the American Southwest. He needed someone with legitimate expertise who could assess the authenticity of his documents without immediately involving universities, museums, or government agencies that might complicate his ownership rights. His research led him to Dr. Isabella Santos, a professor of Spanish colonial history at Northern Arizona University who had published extensively on the Coronado expedition and Spanish mining operations in the Southwest. Her academic profile suggested both the expertise he needed and a scholarly approach that might be sympathetic to his desire for discretion during initial authentication. Jake composed a careful email to Dr. Santos, describing his discovery in general terms and requesting guidance about authentication procedures. He emphasized his commitment to proper historical preservation while noting his need to understand the document's significance before determining next steps.
Dr. Santos, I am writing to request guidance regarding Spanish colonial documents discovered on my family's ranch in Arizona. The materials appear to date from the 1540s and may be related
To the Coronado expedition? I am committed to ensuring these documents receive proper historical attention. But I also need to understand their significance and authenticity before involving broader academic or governmental institutions. Would you be willing to provide preliminary consultation regarding authentication procedures and historical significance? He sent the email that evening, knowing that academic response times might not align with his financial timeline, but hoping that the potential historical significance of his discovery might generate prompt interest. As Jake prepared for bed, the Spanish documents secured in Uncle Carlos's gun safe, he felt the weight of a decision that would define not just his immediate future, but potentially his family's legacy for generations to come. He had chosen uncertainty over safety, possibility. Over guaranteed outcomes, the ranch that had seemed like a burden threatening to destroy his future had revealed connections to history that transcended mere financial calculation. Uncle Carlos's mysterious stories about Spanish secrets had proven to be more than folklore, and the deeper secrets mentioned in his will were beginning to reveal their significance. But time was running short. 30 days to address the foreclosure, limited resources to pursue authentication, and financial pressure that made every decision critical. Jake had committed himself to a path that would require careful navigation. Between historical responsibility, financial necessity, and family legacy, tomorrow would bring new challenges and hopefully new possibilities. But tonight, for the first time since inheriting the ranch, Jake felt that he was exactly where he needed to be, facing exactly the challenges he was meant to address. The documents hidden in Uncle Carlos's safe represented more than just potential. Treasures, they were connections to truth that had waited nearly 5 centuries for the right person to understand their significance. His family's future and potentially significant historical discoveries now depended on his ability to balance immediate practical needs with longer-term possibilities that could change everything. It was exactly the kind of challenge that Uncle Carlos had apparently been preparing him for throughout those childhood summers spent learning about the land's history and the responsibilities that came with understanding its secrets. As sleep finally came, Jake dreamed of Spanish explorers riding across the same desert landscape he knew so well, carrying maps and dreams of discoveries that would remain hidden until someone emerged with the wisdom and determination to bring them into the light. Tonight, that someone was him, and tomorrow would begin the real work of determining what those centuries-old secrets might mean for his family's future. Dr. Isabella Santos's reply arrived far sooner than Jake had expected, appearing in his inbox at 6:47 a.m., just 12 hours after he had sent his initial inquiry. The speed of her response suggested either exceptional dedication to her field or genuine excitement about what he had described. Mr. Rodriguez, your email has generated considerable interest. Documents from the Coronado period are extraordinarily rare, and any authentic materials from that expedition would represent significant historical discoveries. I would be very interested in examining what you have found. Are you available for a meeting this week? Given the potential importance of these materials, I believe immediate assessment would be advisable. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Dr. Isabella Santos, Professor of Spanish Colonial History, Northern Arizona University. Jake read the email 3 times, each reading reinforcing both the potential significance of his discovery and the complexity of what he was about to undertake. Dr. Santos's eagerness to meet suggested that his documents might indeed be as historically important as he had begun to suspect, but it also meant that his quiet period of private research was about to end. He called the number Dr. Santos had provided, reaching her office voicemail with a message promising to return calls within hours, rather than his unusual responsiveness for an academic, suggesting genuine professional excitement about his discovery. Dr. Santos called back while Jake was feeding the cattle that morning, her voice carrying the controlled enthusiasm of a scholar who had learned to temper excitement with professional skepticism. Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for contacting me about your discovery, she began without preamble. I must tell you that claims about Spanish colonial documents from the Coronado period are not uncommon in the Southwest, but authentic materials from that expedition are extraordinarily rare. What you've described, however, has characteristics that suggest genuine historical significance. I understand your caution, Jake replied, watching his small herd of cattle gather around the feed trough while discussing what might be one of the most important conversations of his life. I have background in engineering and some undergraduate history coursework, so I appreciate the importance of proper authentication before making any claims about historical significance. I understand your caution, Jake replied, watching his small herd of cattle gather around the feed trough while discussing what might be one of the most important conversations of his life. I have background in engineering and some undergraduate history coursework, so I appreciate the importance of proper authentication before making any claims about historical significance. That's refreshing, Dr. Santos said, her tone warming slightly. Too often people with alleged historical discoveries have unrealistic expectations about both authenticity and value. Your approach suggests you understand the scholarly process. Would you be willing to bring the materials to my office for preliminary examination? I can provide initial assessment of authenticity markers without any commitment beyond academic consultation. Jake hesitated, feeling the weight of a decision that would mark the transition from private discovery to professional involvement. Once Dr. Santos examined the documents, word would inevitably spread through academic networks, potentially triggering the kind of institutional interest he had been trying to avoid while addressing his financial crisis. Dr. Santos, I appreciate your willingness to help, but I need to understand the implications of academic examination. These documents were discovered on my family's private property, and I'm currently facing some financial challenges related to maintaining ownership of the ranch. I want to ensure that pursuing authentication doesn't compromise my ability to address immediate practical concerns. There was a pause before Dr. Santos responded, her tone becoming more serious and sympathetic. Mr. Rodriguez, I understand your concern, and frankly, it's a wise question that many people fail to consider. Let me be clear about the academic process and your rights as the discoverer and property owner. She explained that preliminary authentication could be conducted confidentially, with no obligation to publish findings or involve other institutions until he decided to do so. As the property owner who had discovered the materials on his own land, he retained fundamental ownership rights, though significant historical discoveries might eventually attract interest from museums, universities, or government agencies. My recommendation would be preliminary assessment to establish authenticity and historical significance. Dr. Santos continued, this would give you the information needed to make informed decisions about next steps, whether that's academic, publication, museum consultation, or private management of the discovery. The key is understanding what you actually have before determining how to proceed. Her approach seemed both professional and respectful of his ownership rights, offering the expertise he needed without immediate commitment to broader institutional involvement. Jake decided that the potential benefits of authentication outweighed the risks of continued uncertainty. I'd like to arrange a meeting, he said finally, but I'd prefer to conduct the initial examination somewhere discreet rather than on a university campus. Would you be willing to visit my ranch? Absolutely, Dr. Santos replied immediately. Field examination is often preferable for historical materials, particularly when they've been discovered in archaeological context. I can arrange to visit as early as tomorrow afternoon if you're available. They confirmed arrangements for Dr. Santos to visit the ranch the following day, with Jake providing directions to the remote property and Dr. Santos explaining the equipment she would bring for preliminary authentication procedures. After ending the call, Jake felt both anticipation and anxiety about crossing the threshold from private discovery to professional evaluation. The rest of that day passed slowly as Jake continued routine ranch work while mentally preparing for what might be the most important academic consultation of his life. He spent the evening creating detailed photographic documentation of each document and map, ensuring that he would have complete records regardless of what happened during the authentication process. More importantly, Jake used the time to research Dr. Santos's academic background and publications, wanting to understand her expertise and approach before entrusting her with potentially priceless historical materials. Her credentials were impressive: Ph.D. in Spanish colonial history from UCLA, author of 3 books on conquistador expeditions, and numerous published papers on Spanish mining operations in the Americas. Her work demonstrated both scholarly rigor and sensitivity to the cultural implications of Spanish colonial research, particularly regarding indigenous perspectives on European exploration. One of her recent papers, titled Hidden Treasures in Official Reports, Evidence for Concealed Discoveries During Spanish Colonial Expeditions, seemed directly relevant to Jake's situation. The paper argued that official Spanish colonial records deliberately omitted significant discoveries to avoid crown taxation and bureaucratic oversight, and that private expedition records might contain information that fundamentally contradicted official historical narratives. Reading Dr. Santos's research, Jake realized that his documents might not just be valuable artifacts, but potential evidence for historical theories that scholars had been pursuing for decades. If authentic, his maps and journals could provide direct proof that Spanish explorers had made significant mineral discoveries in the American Southwest while deliberately concealing those discoveries from colonial authorities. Dr. Santos arrived at the ranch precisely on time the following afternoon, driving a university vehicle equipped with specialized storage containers for transporting historical materials. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back professionally and carrying equipment cases that suggested serious preparation for the examination. "Mr. Rodriguez," she extended her hand with a firm handshake. "Thank you for allowing me to examine these materials. I must admit your discovery has generated considerable anticipation. Authentic documents from the Coronado expedition would represent one of the most significant historical finds in the Southwest in decades." Jake led her into the ranch house, where he had prepared the kitchen table for examination, with clean white sheets providing a neutral background for the documents. Dr. Santos immediately began unpacking specialized equipment high resolution. Cameras, magnifying devices, and what appeared to be chemical testing materials for analyzing paper and ink composition. "Before we begin," Dr. Santos said, donning white cotton gloves, "I want to emphasize that this examination is confidential academic consultation. I won't discuss these materials with anyone without your explicit permission, and you retain complete control over any decisions about publication or institutional involvement." Jake carefully retrieved the leather portfolio from Uncle Carlos's gun safe. Feeling the weight of centuries as he placed it on the examination table, Dr. Santos's eyes widened slightly as she examined the portfolio itself, running gloved fingers over the leatherwork and brass fittings. "The craftsmanship is consistent with Spanish colonial period," she murmured, speaking partly to herself as she worked. Hand-tooled leather, brass hardware showing appropriate aging patterns, construction techniques that align with 16th century Spanish leatherworking traditions. With meticulous care, Dr. Santos opened the portfolio and examined the documents inside. Her professional composure faltered momentarily as she saw the maps and journals, her breath catching slightly before she regained scholarly objectivity. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said quietly, her voice carrying barely controlled excitement, "these appear to be extraordinary examples of Spanish colonial cartography and expedition documentation. The parchment type, ink composition, script style, everything I can observe suggests materials consistent with mid-16th century Spanish colonial expeditions." She photographed each document with professional equipment while maintaining careful notes about physical characteristics, construction details, and content observations. As she worked, Dr. Santos provided running commentary about authentication, markers that supported the document's apparent age and origin. The parchment shows aging patterns that are extremely difficult to reproduce artificially, she explained while examining one of the maps under magnification. The ink has the brownish oxidation characteristic of iron gall formulations used during the Spanish colonial period. Most importantly, the cartographic style and geographic knowledge demonstrated in these maps align precisely with what we would expect from Coronado expedition documentation. Jake watched the authentication process with growing excitement and apprehension. Each positive indicator from Dr. Santos increased both the potential value of his discovery and the complexity of decisions he would soon face about how to proceed. "The content is particularly remarkable," Dr. Santos continued, beginning to translate portions of the Spanish text with evident expertise. "These appeared to be private expedition records documenting discoveries that were deliberately omitted from official reports to Spanish colonial authorities. If authentic, they provide direct evidence for historical theories about concealed Spanish colonial discoveries." She pointed to specific passages in the journals that described mining operations and treasure concealment. "This text describes minas secretas, establecidas, sin conocimiento del virrey, secret mines established without the viceroy's knowledge. And here, oro, puro, extrado, y, escondido, para, evitar, impuestos, colonials pure gold, extracted and hidden to avoid colonial taxation." The translations confirmed what Jake had begun to understand through his own research. The documents describe systematic concealment of valuable discoveries from Spanish colonial authorities, providing specific location information for hidden mines and buried treasure. "Dr. Santos," Jake asked carefully, assuming these documents are authentic, What would be their potential significance for historical understanding of Spanish colonial exploration? She looked up from the magnifying device, her eyes bright with scholarly excitement. Mr. Rodriguez, if these materials are genuine and preliminary indicators, strongly suggest they could fundamentally change our understanding of the Coronado expedition's actual discoveries and the extent of Spanish colonial knowledge about mineral resources in the American Southwest. Dr. Santos explained that official Spanish colonial records suggested the Coronado expedition had found little gold or silver, leading to the conclusion that Spanish exploration of the Southwest had been largely unsuccessful. But historians had long suspected that official reports might not reflect the complete truth, particularly given the strong incentives for concealing discoveries from Crown taxation. These documents appear to provide direct evidence that Spanish explorers did indeed find significant mineral wealth in the American Southwest, but concealed those discoveries through private mining operations that continued long after the official expedition ended, she continued. The maps show remarkable geographical knowledge and include location information that could potentially be correlated with physical sites. The authentication session continued for nearly 3 hours, with Dr. Santos conducting increasingly sophisticated tests on small samples of paper and ink. Each test reinforced her initial assessment that the materials were consistent with authentic Spanish colonial expedition records from the 1540s period. Finally, Dr. Santos sat back and looked directly at Jake with an expression of barely contained amazement. Mr. Rodriguez, based on preliminary examination, I believe you have discovered what may be the most significant collection of Spanish colonial expedition documents found in the American Southwest in the past century. The words hung in the air between them, marking the moment when Jake's private speculation became expert validation. His discovery was not just authentic, it was potentially groundbreaking for a historical scholarship. What happens now? Jake asked, feeling the weight of decisions that would affect not just his immediate financial crisis, but potentially historical understanding and academic research for years to come. That depends entirely on your goals and timeline, Dr. Santos replied thoughtfully. From a purely academic perspective, these materials deserve comprehensive study and eventual publication to advance historical knowledge. From a practical standpoint, authentic Spanish colonial documents of this significance have substantial monetary value to collectors, museums, and academic institutions. She explained that full authentication would require more extensive testing and analysis, including comparative studies with known documents from the period and consultation with additional experts in Spanish colonial cartography and metallurgy. But even preliminary examination provided sufficient evidence to confirm extraordinary historical significance. The question, Dr. Santos continued, is whether you're interested in academic collaboration that could maximize historical understanding, private sale that could address immediate financial needs, or some combination that serves both purposes. Jake felt the complexity of the decision weighing on him. The authentication confirmed that his discovery could indeed provide financial salvation for the ranch, but it also revealed historical significance that transcended mere monetary value. These documents represented truth about Spanish colonial exploration that had remained hidden for nearly 5 centuries, and decisions about their future would affect not just his family's financial situation, but historical knowledge itself. Dr. Santos, I appreciate your expertise and discretion, Jake said finally. I need some time to consider the implications of what you've confirmed, but I also have immediate practical concerns about maintaining ownership of the ranch while making decisions about these materials. I understand completely, she replied. Historical discoveries often create tension between immediate practical needs and longer-term scholarly value. What I can offer is continued consultation as you consider your options, and if you decide to pursue academic collaboration, I can facilitate connections with institutions that might provide both scholarly resources and financial support. As Dr. Santos packed her equipment and prepared to leave, she handed Jake a business card with multiple contact numbers. Mr. Rodriguez, regardless of what you decide about these documents, please know that their discovery represents an extraordinary contribution to historical knowledge. I hope we can work together to ensure they receive the attention they deserve while serving your family's needs. After she departed, Jake sat alone in the kitchen where the Spanish documents lay spread across the table, their significance now. Validated by expert examination, the authentication had answered some questions while raising others that were potentially more complex. He now knew with confidence that his discovery was historically significant and financially valuable. But he also understood that pursuing either academic collaboration or private sale would inevitably attract broader attention to both the documents and their discovery location. Word would spread through professional networks, potentially reaching institutions or individuals with interests that might not align with his family's needs. Most immediately, Jake realized he needed to secure the documents more carefully than Uncle Carlos's gun safe provided. Materials confirmed to be this historically significant required professional preservation and security measures that his current setup couldn't provide. That evening, Jake called his sister Alina, deciding that family should be informed about the discovery's confirmed significance before he made decisions about next steps. "Alina, I need to tell you about something I discovered on the ranch," he began carefully. "Something that changes our situation significantly." "Jake, please tell me you're not calling about some crazy scheme to avoid selling to the developers," Lena replied with the exasperated tone of someone who had participated in many conversations about her brother's impractical attachment to the failing ranch. "Actually, it's exactly the opposite," Jake said. "I've discovered something on the ranch that could solve our financial problems permanently while preserving the property's historical significance." He explained his discovery and Dr. Santos's authentication in terms that emphasized both historical importance and potential financial value. Alina listened with growing amazement as Jake described Spanish colonial documents that could be worth substantial amounts to collectors or institutions. "You're telling me that Uncle Carlos knew about Spanish treasure maps hidden on the ranch and never mentioned this to anyone?" Alina asked, her legal training immediately focusing on practical implications. "Not exactly treasure maps," Jake clarified. "More like historical expedition records that document where Spanish explorers concealed mining operations and stored extracted gold and silver. The difference is that these documents could have both historical value and practical application." Alina was quiet for a moment before responding. "Jake, if these documents are as significant as this professor suggests, you need proper legal representation before making any decisions about authentication, sale, or academic collaboration. Historical discoveries on private property involve complex intellectual property and ownership questions that could affect both immediate decisions and long-term family interests." Her legal perspective provided sobering reminder that validating his discovery's significance was only the first step in a process that would require careful navigation of academic, legal, and financial considerations. But for the first time, since inheriting the ranch, Jake felt that he was dealing with opportunities rather than just problems. The documents spread across his kitchen table represented more than potential financial salvation. They were connections to truth that had waited nearly 5 centuries for someone with the wisdom and determination to bring them into the light. Uncle Carlos had apparently preserved both the physical evidence and the family's ownership of the land till the right moment in their history. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions about how to balance immediate financial needs with longer-term possibilities for both historical scholarship and family legacy. But tonight, Jake felt the satisfaction of having honored Uncle Carlos's mysterious trust by discovering the deeper secrets the old man had preserved for the right moment. As he carefully secured the documents back in the gun safe, Jake realized that his commitment to pursue authentication had already begun transforming both his understanding of his family's history and his vision for the ranch's future. Whatever decisions lay ahead, he was no longer simply trying to save a failing agricultural operation. He was stewarding historical discoveries that could change scholarly understanding of Spanish colonial exploration while preserving his family's connection to land that had held these secrets for centuries. The authentication had confirmed that Uncle Carlos's stories were more than folklore. And tomorrow would begin the real work of determining how these centuries-old secrets could serve both historical truth and his family's future in the 21st century. Dr. Santos's follow-up call came 3 days after her ranch visit, but her tone had shifted from scholarly excitement to something approaching urgency. Jake answered, while checking the irrigation system that had led to his original discovery. The irony not lost on him that routine ranch maintenance had uncovered What might be one of the most significant historical finds in the American Southwest? Mr. Rodriguez, I hope I'm not calling too early, Dr. Santos began, though her voice suggested this conversation couldn't wait for conventional courtesy hours. I've completed additional analysis of the photographs and samples from our meeting. I need to discuss some developments that have emerged since our consultation. Jake felt a flutter of concern. What kind of developments? First, the positive news, Dr. Santos continued. I've conducted comparative analysis with authenticated Spanish colonial documents from the same period, and every indicator confirms that your materials are genuine 16th century expedition records. The paper composition, ink formulation, and linguistic patterns all align perfectly with known examples from the Coronado expedition timeframe. She paused before continuing with information that would change everything. However, during my research process, I shared some basic details about the discovery with two colleagues who specialize in Spanish colonial cartography and metallurgy. This was standard academic protocol for authentication, but it has generated significant interest within scholarly networks. Jake's stomach tightened. What kind of interest? Dr. Michael Patterson from the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History called yesterday, Dr. Santos explained. He's one of the foremost experts on Spanish colonial exploration. And when he learned about documents that might contradict official Coronado expedition records, he immediately requested consultation access. More concerning, he mentioned that word has reached colleagues in government research divisions who maintain interest in historical discoveries with potential strategic implications. The mention of government interest sent alarm bells through Jake's mind. Strategic implications. These are historical documents about Spanish colonial exploration. What strategic relevance could they possibly have? Dr. Santos's explanation revealed complexities Jake had never considered. Spanish colonial mining records often contain geological information that remains relevant for modern resource assessment. Government agencies maintain interest in historical documents that might identify mineral deposits or natural resources, particularly in regions where comprehensive geological surveys haven't been completed. She continued with information that made Jake's situation suddenly more complicated. Additionally, authentic Spanish colonial documents have national cultural significance that can trigger federal oversight under various historical preservation statutes. While you maintain ownership rights as the discoverer on private property, significant historical discoveries sometimes attract institutional attention that complicates private management. Jake felt the weight of decisions he had hoped to make privately becoming subject to scrutiny from powerful institutions with their own agendas. Dr. Santos, I appreciate your honesty about these developments. What do you recommend as next steps? I believe you need legal consultation before proceeding further, she replied immediately. Someone who specializes in cultural property law and can advise you about your rights while protecting your interests. I can recommend attorneys who work specifically with historical discovery issues. Dr. Santos provided contact information for Rebecca Chen, cultural property attorney based in Phoenix, who specialized in representing private individuals dealing with significant historical discoveries. But she also delivered news that made Jake realize his timeline for private decision-making was rapidly closing. Mr. Rodriguez, there's something else you should know, she said carefully. Dr. Patterson mentioned that he's planning to contact you directly about examining the documents. He's a respected scholar, but he also has strong connections to federal agencies that maintain historical research programs. You may want to be prepared for official interest in your discovery. After ending the call, Jake sat in his truck beside the irrigation ditch where everything had started, trying to process how quickly his private discovery was becoming a matter of broader institutional attention. The authentication he had sought to understand his document's significance had inevitably led to academic networks that extended far beyond his control. His phone buzzed with an unknown number bearing a Washington, D.C. area code. Rate accelerated as he answered, suspecting this might be the official contact Dr. Santos had warned him about. Mr. Rodriguez. This is Dr. Michael Patterson from the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of American History. The voice was professionally friendly, but carried an undertone of authority that suggested this wasn't a casual academic inquiry. I understand you've discovered some Spanish colonial documents that may have significance for our research programs. Jake chose his words carefully, remembering Dr. Santos's advice about controlling information until he had proper legal guidance. Dr. Patterson, thank you for calling. I have discovered some historical materials on my family's property, and I'm currently consulting with experts about their authentication and significance. I appreciate your caution, Dr. Patterson replied smoothly. However, Dr. Santos has shared preliminary information suggesting these documents might relate to previously unknown Spanish colonial mining operations. Such discoveries have implications that extend beyond purely academic interest, particularly when they involve potential resource documentation or geographical information with contemporary relevance. The phrasing suggested knowledge about Jake's discovery that went beyond what Dr. Santos had indicated she would share. Jake felt a growing sense that information about his documents was spreading through networks he hadn't anticipated or authorized. Dr. Patterson, I'm committed to ensuring these materials receive appropriate scholarly attention. Jake replied diplomatically. However, I'm currently addressing some practical concerns about maintaining my family's property while making decisions about the document's future. I hope you understand that I need to proceed carefully. Of course, Dr. Patterson's tone remained cordial, but Jake detected subtle pressure beneath the academic courtesy. However, I should mention that documents of this apparent significance often qualify for federal research funding that could address financial concerns while ensuring proper scholarly study. We have programs specifically designed to support private individuals who discover materials of national historical importance. The offer was appealing, particularly given Jake's foreclosure deadline. But it also suggested that his documents had already attracted the kind of institutional attention he had hoped to avoid while making private decisions about authentication and value. I appreciate the information about funding programs, Jake said carefully. I'll certainly consider that option as I evaluate how to proceed. May I ask how you learned about my discovery? There was a brief pause before Dr. Patterson responded. Academic networks are quite efficient at sharing information about significant discoveries. Mr. Rodriguez. Dr. Santos's consultation inquiries naturally reached colleagues who specialize in related research areas. But I want to assure you that our interest is purely scholarly, focused on advancing historical understanding rather than compromising your ownership rights. After ending the call, Jake immediately contacted Rebecca Chen, the cultural property attorney Dr. Santos had recommended. Her secretary scheduled an emergency consultation for the following morning, emphasizing that the attorney specialized in exactly the kind of situation Jake was facing. That evening, Jake's sister Alina called with news that confirmed his growing sense that his discovery was attracting attention beyond academic circles. Jake, I've been researching cultural property law since our conversation, Alina began without preamble. And I think you need to understand that significant historical discoveries on private property often trigger interest from multiple federal agencies, not just academics. She explained that various government departments maintained research programs related to historical documents that might contain geographical resource or strategic information. The Department of Defense had historical research divisions. The Department of Energy maintained interest in documents that might reference mineral resources. And the Department of Interior had oversight responsibilities for significant archaeological discoveries. What I'm saying, Elena continued, is that if your documents are as important as this professor suggests, you're probably going to hear from more than just museums and universities. You need professional legal representation before making any commitments about access or collaboration. Elena's legal training had identified implications that Jake's focus on historical and financial aspects had overlooked. Significant discoveries could trigger regulatory oversight that complicated private ownership, regardless of good intentions from academic or government representatives. Jake spent a restless night considering how rapidly his situation was evolving, from private discovery to institutional interest. The documents that had seemed like potential salvation for his financial crisis were becoming the center of attention from organizations whose agendas might not align with his family's needs. The meeting with Rebecca Chen the following morning took place in a Phoenix law office that specialized in cultural property and heritage law. Chen was a sharp-witted attorney in her 40s who immediately demonstrated understanding of the complex Legal issues surrounding private historical discoveries. Mr. Rodriguez, based on your description and the institutional interest you're already receiving, I believe you're dealing with what we call a significant cultural property discovery. Chen began after reviewing the basic facts of Jake's situation. This creates both opportunities and challenges that require careful navigation. She explained that as the property owner who had discovered the materials on his own land, Jake retained fundamental ownership rights. However, materials of exceptional historical significance could potentially trigger various federal oversight mechanisms, particularly if they contained information relevant to national resources or cultural heritage. The key, Chen continued, is maintaining control of the authentication and evaluation process while protecting your rights and interests. Once you commit to institutional collaboration or government involvement, you may find it difficult to maintain private decision-making authority. Chen's recommendations were specific and practical. Document everything meticulously, control access to information about the discovery's details, and avoid commitments to any institutional collaboration until he fully understood the implications and potential benefits. Most importantly, she added, don't allow anyone to examine the original documents without proper legal agreements that protect your ownership rights and specify terms for any research or publication that results from such access. As Jake left the attorney's office, his phone rang with yet another unknown number, this time showing a local Arizona area code but with a formality that suggested official rather than academic interest. Mr. Rodriguez, this is Agent Sarah Mitchell from the Bureau of Land Management's Cultural Resources Division. The voice was professional and measured. We understand you've discovered some Spanish colonial documents that may have relevance to federal heritage preservation programs. Jake felt a chill of apprehension. Government agencies were now contacting him directly, confirming Elena's warnings about multiple federal interests and significant historical discoveries. Agent Mitchell, thank you for calling, Jake replied carefully, remembering Chen's advice about controlling information. I've discovered some historical materials on my private property. I'm currently consulting with legal counsel about appropriate procedures for authentication and preservation. That's exactly why I'm calling, Mitchell replied. The BLM has resources specifically designed to assist private property owners who discover materials of cultural significance. We can provide expertise for proper preservation and assessment, while ensuring you receive appropriate recognition and potential compensation for discoveries that advance public historical knowledge. The offer sounded reasonable, but Jake's recent legal consultation had taught him to be cautious about institutional involvement that might compromise his control over decisions about the document's future. I appreciate the information about BLM programs, Jake said diplomatically. I'll certainly consider that option as I work with my attorney to understand all available alternatives. Of course, Mitchell's tone remained cordial. However, I should mention that certain categories of historical discoveries on private property fall under federal jurisdiction when they have national significance. While we prefer voluntary cooperation, there are legal mechanisms for ensuring that important cultural materials receive appropriate protection and study. The subtle warning was unmistakable. Jake was being informed that his ownership rights might not be absolute if his discovery was deemed to have national cultural significance. The conversation ended cordially, but the message was clear: institutional. Interest in his documents extended beyond academic collaboration to potential regulatory oversight. That afternoon brought yet another contact that confirmed the escalating complexity of Jake's situation. Dr. Patricia Williams from Arizona State University's Department of Anthropology called with news that academic interest had spread beyond Spanish colonial historians to archaeologists specializing in indigenous cultural heritage. Mr. Rodriguez, I understand you've discovered Spanish colonial documents that may reference interaction with indigenous populations in the Arizona region, Dr. Williams began. Such materials often have significance for understanding pre-Columbian cultural sites and resource utilization that extends beyond European colonial history. She explained that Spanish colonial mining records frequently documented existing indigenous operations or sacred sites that had been appropriated or modified by European explorers. If Jake's documents contain such references, they might have implications for modern tribal cultural heritage claims or archaeological site protection. What I'm suggesting, Dr. Williams continued, is that your discovery may have stakeholders beyond Spanish colonial historians. Indigenous communities have legitimate interests in historical documents that reference their ancestral territories or cultural sites. Jake appreciated Dr. Williams's perspective, but it added another layer of complexity to decisions about his document's future. Academic collaboration that seemed straightforward from a historical research perspective now involved potential cultural heritage claims, federal oversight, and institutional interests that extended far beyond his original concerns about ranch finances and family legacy. As the day progressed, Jake received additional calls from representatives of the Arizona Historical Society, the National Park Service's Heritage Preservation Division, and a private historical document collector who had somehow learned about his discovery through professional networks. Each contact reinforced the same pattern: genuine academic or institutional interest, combined with subtle pressure to provide access or agree to collaboration arrangements before Jake had time to fully understand the implications or explore alternative options. That evening, Jake sat on his ranch house porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains with golden light. The same light that had illuminated this landscape when Spanish explorers first documented their secret mining operations nearly 5 centuries ago. The documents hidden in Uncle Carlos's gun safe had transformed from private family discovery to the center of attention from academic, governmental, and commercial interests that seemed to grow more complex by the hour. His phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Santos. "Mr. Rodriguez, I apologize for the attention this has generated. Academic networks move quickly when significant discoveries emerge. Please know that I respect your ownership rights and will support whatever decisions you make about these materials. But I must warn you that word has reached federal research divisions that maintain classified interest in historical documents with strategic implications. You may need to prepare for official contact that goes beyond academic or cultural heritage concerns." The message confirmed Jake's growing understanding that his discovery had significance that extended far beyond historical scholarship or potential financial value. Government agencies maintained research programs related to Spanish colonial documents that might contain strategic information, and his maps and mining records had apparently triggered interest from those programs. Jake called Rebecca Chen's emergency number, reaching the attorney at her home with an urgency that reflected the day's escalating developments. "Ms. Chen, I need immediate advice," Jake began without preamble. "I've received contacts from multiple federal agencies, academic institutions, and private collectors, all expressing interest in accessing my documents. The situation is moving much faster than I anticipated, and I'm concerned about losing control of decisions that affect my family's property and financial situation." Chen's response was immediate and decisive. "Mr. Rodriguez, based on what you're describing, I believe your discovery has triggered institutional interest that could quickly overwhelm your ability to make private decisions about these materials. We need to meet immediately to develop a strategy for maintaining your rights while managing the pressures you're facing." She arranged an emergency meeting for the following morning and provided specific instructions for the interim document. "All contacts and conversations. Make no commitments to any institutional access or collaboration. And most importantly, secure the original documents in a professional facility rather than keeping them at the ranch. The level of interest you're describing suggests these documents have significance that goes beyond normal historical discoveries," Chen explained. "Once multiple federal agencies are involved, you're dealing with potential national security or strategic resource implications that require very careful legal navigation." As Jake ended the call and prepared to secure his documents for transport to a professional storage facility in Phoenix, he reflected on how dramatically his situation had changed in just 1 week. The Spanish colonial maps that Uncle Carlos had preserved in a simple gun safe were now the subject of interest from Smithsonian researchers, federal agencies, tribal heritage advocates, and private collectors. The ranch that had seemed like a financial burden was now connected to discoveries that could change historical understanding of Spanish colonial exploration while potentially triggering government oversight of his family's property. Uncle Carlos's, mysterious references to deeper secrets, and responsibilities that came with understanding were beginning to reveal their full meaning. Tomorrow would bring decisions about legal strategy and institutional negotiations that could define not just his immediate financial situation, but his family's relationship with discoveries that had historical significance extending far beyond personal or local interests. The documents hidden for nearly 5 centuries were demanding wisdom and determination that would be tested by pressures Jake was only beginning to understand. But tonight, as he carefully wrapped the Spanish colonial materials for transport to secure storage, Jake felt the weight of stewardship that Uncle Carlos had apparently been preparing him for throughout those childhood summers spent learning about the land's history and the responsibilities that came with preserving family legacy. The discovery that had begun with routine irrigation repair was revealing itself as a test of his ability to balance historical truth, family heritage, institutional pressure, and personal integrity in decisions that would affect not just his own future, but potentially scholarly understanding of one of the most significant periods in American history. Tomorrow would begin the real challenge of navigating institutional interests while preserving both his family's rights and the historical truth that Uncle Carlos had entrusted to his care. The black SUVs appeared on Jake's Ranch Road at exactly 7:30 a.m., 3 vehicles moving in formation with the unmistakable precision of federal government operations. Jake watched from his kitchen window as the convoy approached, his stomach nodding with the realization that Rebecca Chen's warnings about national security implications were about to become reality. The lead vehicle bore government plates, and the men who emerged wore civilian clothing that couldn't disguise their military bearing. Jake had been expecting this moment since Dr. Santos's warning about federal research divisions, but seeing armed federal agents on his family's ranch still sent adrenaline surging through his system. A tall man in a dark suit approached the house with measured steps, followed by 2 companions who maintained professional alertness while surveying the property. Their presence transformed Jake's remote ranch from peaceful agricultural setting to the center of what was clearly a significant government operation. Mr. Rodriguez, the lead agent, called from the porch, his voice carrying authority despite its conversational tone. "I'm Agent David Morrison from the Department of Defense Historical Research Division. We need to discuss the Spanish colonial documents you've discovered on this property." Jake opened the door, but remained in the threshold. Remembering Chen's advice about controlling interactions with federal representatives, "Agent Morrison, thank you for identifying yourselves. I'm consulting with legal counsel about these materials. I'd prefer to coordinate any government contact through my attorney." "I understand your caution," Morrison replied, producing official identification that confirmed his Department of Defense credentials. "However, the documents you've discovered may contain information relevant to ongoing national security research programs. While we respect private property rights, certain categories of historical materials fall under federal jurisdiction when they have strategic implications." The phrase strategic implications echoed warnings Jake had received from multiple sources about government interests in Spanish colonial mining records. Morrison's presence confirmed that his discovery had indeed triggered the kind of classified research attention that Chen had warned could complicate private ownership. "Agent Morrison, I appreciate the government's interest," Jake replied carefully, "but these documents were discovered on my family's private property. I'm committed to ensuring they receive appropriate attention through proper legal channels. My attorney has advised me to coordinate all institutional contact through her office." Morrison nodded with the patient expression of someone accustomed to dealing with civilian resistance to federal authority. "Mr. Rodriguez, I need to inform you that Spanish colonial documents containing geological or cartographic information fall under specialized oversight when they reference mineral resources or strategic materials. Your discovery has been flagged by our research programs as potentially containing such information. He produced an official document bearing Department of Defense letterhead and multiple classification stamps. "This is a formal notice of federal interest in historical materials discovered on your property. While it doesn't transfer ownership, it establishes government authority to examine materials that may have national security relevance." Jake accepted the document without reading it immediately. Understanding that his response would be crucial for maintaining negotiating position, Chen had prepared him for exactly this scenario, emphasizing the importance of acknowledging federal authority while protecting his fundamental rights. "I'll have my attorney review this notice," Jake said diplomatically. "I'm committed to addressing any legitimate national security concerns while protecting my family's property rights and ensuring these historically significant materials receive appropriate scholarly attention." "We appreciate your cooperation," Morrison replied, though his tone suggested limited patience for legal procedures that might delay federal access. "However, I should mention that our research indicates these documents may reference uranium deposits or other strategic mineral resources documented by Spanish colonial mining operations. Such information has contemporary relevance that extends beyond historical scholarship." The mention of uranium sent a chill through Jake's understanding of his situation. Spanish colonial documents referencing radioactive materials would indeed have strategic implications that could trigger federal oversight, regardless of private property rights or academic interests. Morrison continued with information that fundamentally changed Jake's understanding of government interest in his discovery. "Mr. Rodriguez, the Department of Defense has maintained classified research programs related to Spanish colonial mining records since the Manhattan Project era, historical documents that might identify uranium deposits or other strategic mineral locations are considered sensitive materials, regardless of their archaeological significance." The revelation connected Jake's discovery to Cold War-era research, programs, and ongoing national security interests that extended far beyond academic authentication or cultural heritage preservation. His family's ranch had unexpectedly become connected to classified government research that spanned decades of strategic mineral assessments. "What exactly are you requesting?" Jake asked directly, deciding that clarity about federal expectations would help him understand his options. "Immediate access to examine the original documents," Morrison replied without hesitation. "Our specialists need to assess their content for any information relevant to strategic resource locations or national security concerns. This examination would be conducted with appropriate security protocols while respecting the material's historical significance." Jake felt the weight of a decision that would define not just his immediate situation, but potentially his family's relationship with federal authorities for years to come. Refusing federal access could trigger legal proceedings that might ultimately compromise his ownership rights. But agreeing to immediate examination could establish precedents that eliminated his control over future decisions about the documents. "Agent Morrison, I understand the government's concerns," Jake replied, "but I need to consult with my attorney before agreeing to any examination procedures. These materials have substantial historical and personal significance that requires careful consideration of all implications." Morrison's expression tightened slightly, suggesting federal patience was reaching its limits. "Mr. Rodriguez, I want to emphasize that this is a matter of national security assessment, not optional academic consultation. While we prefer voluntary cooperation, there are legal mechanisms for ensuring access to materials that may contain strategic information." The subtle threat was unmistakable, but Jake had been prepared for exactly this pressure by Chen's legal guidance. Federal authority over private historical discoveries was limited by constitutional protections that required proper legal procedures rather than simple assertions of national security necessity. "I appreciate that information," Jake said calmly, "and I'm committed to addressing any legitimate security concerns through appropriate legal channels. My attorney specializes in cultural property law and federal oversight issues, so she can facilitate proper procedures that serve both government interests and constitutional protections." After the federal agents departed with clear frustration at not achieving immediate access, Jake immediately called Rebecca Chen's emergency number. Her response confirmed both the seriousness of federal interest and the importance of the legal strategy they had developed. "Mr. Rodriguez, the Department of Defense doesn't send agents to private ranches unless they believe materials have genuine strategic significance," Chen said immediately upon hearing about Morrison's visit. "But their interest also confirms that your documents are extraordinarily valuable from both historical and practical perspectives." She explained that federal authority over private Historical Discoveries was constrained by constitutional property protections and cultural heritage laws that required proper legal procedures rather than simple demands for access. Warned that prolonged resistance to national security assessments could trigger more aggressive federal action. The key, Chen continued, is negotiating terms that acknowledged legitimate security concerns while protecting your ownership rights, and ensuring you receive appropriate compensation for any federal use or restriction of your materials. Chen's legal strategy involved immediate federal court filing to establish protective jurisdiction over the documents, while Jake's ownership rights were determined through proper legal procedures. This would prevent federal seizure while ensuring that any government access occurred under court supervision with explicit protections for Jake's interests. But before they could implement legal protection, Jake's situation escalated in an unexpected direction. Dr. Santos called that afternoon with news that academic interest had generated international attention beyond anything she had anticipated. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm afraid I have concerning news," Dr. Santos began with obvious distress. "Word about your discovery has reached Spanish government. Cultural heritage officials through international academic networks, they're claiming that Spanish colonial documents discovered in former Spanish territories may fall under international heritage protection agreements." Jake felt his already complex situation becoming impossibly complicated. Spanish government officials? What kind of claims are they making? Dr. Santos explained that Spain maintained cultural heritage claims over Spanish colonial artifacts discovered in former Spanish territories, particularly materials that documented official Spanish government operations like colonial mining expeditions. While such claims rarely succeeded in American courts, they could complicate ownership determinations and federal government decisions about access and preservation. Additionally, Dr. Santos continued with even greater concern. "I've learned that private historical document collectors have begun making substantial offers for potential purchase of your materials. Word has leaked through academic networks about the discovery's significance, and commercial interest is escalating rapidly." The mention of commercial collectors added another layer of pressure to Jake's situation. Private buyers with substantial resources could offer immediate financial solutions to his ranch's foreclosure crisis. But selling historically significant materials to private collectors might eliminate opportunities for scholarly research and public historical benefit. That evening brought the most unexpected development yet. Jake's phone rang with an international number that displayed a Madrid area code. "Señor Rodriguez, this is Dr. Carlos Mendoza from the Spanish Ministry of Culture's Colonial Heritage Division." The accented English was formal and precise. "We understand you have discovered documents related to Spanish colonial operations in your territory. Such materials are considered part of Spain's cultural patrimony under international heritage agreements." Jake felt overwhelmed by the scope of institutional interest his discovery had generated. Federal agents, academic researchers, international government officials, private collectors were all asserting interests in documents he had found while conducting routine ranch maintenance. "Dr. Mendoza, thank you for calling," Jake replied carefully. "But these documents were discovered on my family's private property in the United States. I'm consulting with American legal counsel about appropriate procedures for authentication and preservation." "Señor Rodriguez, we appreciate your position," Mendoza replied diplomatically. "But Spanish colonial expedition records are considered cultural heritage materials that transcend modern national boundaries. We are prepared to offer substantial compensation for repatriation of these documents to Spanish cultural institutions, where they can receive proper scholarly study." The Spanish government's offer represented yet another alternative that could solve Jake's immediate financial crisis while ensuring scholarly attention for the documents. But it would also mean removing historically significant American Southwest materials from U.S. institutions and researchers. After ending the international call, Jake sat in his kitchen feeling the weight of decisions that had expanded far beyond anything he could have imagined when he first discovered the leather portfolio. Hidden in Uncle Carlos's stone chamber, federal agents, international governments, academic institutions, and private collectors were all asserting claims or interests in his family's discovery. His phone rang again, this time showing Rebecca Chen's number, with what he hoped would be legal guidance for navigating the impossibly complex situation his discovery had created. Mr. Rodriguez, I filed emergency federal court motions to establish protective jurisdiction over your documents, Chen began immediately. This prevents any seizure or forced access while we determine proper legal procedures for addressing the various claims and interests that have emerged. She explained that federal court protection would require Jake to deposit the original documents with the court's custody, but under conditions that preserved his ownership rights while ensuring proper preservation and controlled access for legitimate examination purposes. More importantly, Chen continued, I've been contacted by the National Archives and Records Administration, which has authority over historically significant documents discovered on private property. They're offering a partnership arrangement that could address federal security concerns, academic research interests, your financial needs through a comprehensive agreement. The National Archives proposal involved Jake maintaining ownership while granting controlled access for federal security assessment, academic research, and public historical benefit. In return, Jake would receive substantial compensation for providing public access while retaining rights to any commercial value from reproduction or publication. This approach, Chen explained, serves everyone's legitimate interests while preventing the kind of protracted legal battles that could eliminate your control over decisions about the document's future. Jake felt relief at finally hearing about a solution that acknowledged his rights while addressing the complex institutional interests his discovery had generated. But he also needed to understand the practical implications for his immediate foreclosure crisis and long-term ranch operations. Ms. Chen, does this arrangement provide immediate financial assistance for addressing the ranch's mortgage situation? Jake asked directly. Yes, Chen replied immediately. The National Archives has emergency funding specifically for situations like yours, where historically significant discoveries require immediate preservation and protection. They can provide advance payment against future compensation to address your immediate financial needs. That weekend, Jake met with National Archives representatives, federal security officials, academic researchers, and his legal team in a Phoenix conference room that had been configured for handling sensitive historical materials. The documents that had started as Uncle Carlos's mysterious family legacy were now the center of a complex negotiation involving multiple federal agencies, international academic institutions, and constitutional law specialists. Dr. Elizabeth Harper from the National Archives led the meeting with professional efficiency that suggested extensive experience managing historically significant discoveries with complex ownership and security implications. Mr. Rodriguez, what you've discovered represents one of the most significant collections of Spanish colonial expedition records found in the American Southwest. Dr. Harper began. Our goal is developing an arrangement that preserves these materials for historical research while addressing security concerns and ensuring you receive appropriate recognition and compensation. The National Archives proposal was comprehensive and fair. Jake would retain ownership while granting 50-year institutional custody for preservation, search, and controlled public access. Federal security assessment would be conducted under academic supervision to ensure minimal impact on historical value. Jake would receive immediate compensation of $750,000 plus ongoing royalties from any commercial reproduction or publication. Most importantly for Jake's immediate situation, the arrangement included emergency funding that would address the ranch's foreclosure crisis, while providing resources for establishing the property as a historical site related to Spanish colonial exploration. Agent Morrison, representing federal security interests, confirmed that preliminary examinations suggested the documents contained geological information relevant to strategic mineral assessments, but nothing that required classification or a restriction of academic access. Mr. Rodriguez, your discovery provides valuable historical information about Spanish colonial knowledge of mineral resources in this region, Morrison explained. But it doesn't appear to contain specific location information that would compromise contemporary security interests. Dr. Santos, representing academic research interests, expressed enthusiasm about the arrangement's potential for advancing scholarly understanding of Spanish colonial exploration, while ensuring Jake maintained appropriate recognition and benefit from his discovery. This agreement creates a model for how private discoveries can serve public historical benefit while protecting the rights and interests of the individuals who preserve these materials for future generations. Dr. Santos concluded. 3 weeks later, Jake stood in the same kitchen where he had first examined Uncle Carlos's Spanish colonial documents. Now watching as National Archives preservation specialists carefully packaged the materials for transport to specialized facilities in Washington, D.C., the leather portfolio that had weighed so heavily in his hands was being prepared for scholarly study that would potentially rewrite understanding of Spanish colonial exploration in the American Southwest. The check from the National Archives had arrived 2 days earlier, allowing Jake to satisfy the ranch's mortgage obligations, while providing substantial resources for modernizing operations and establishing the property as a historical site. The foreclosure crisis that had threatened to destroy his family's legacy has been resolved through discoveries that connected his ranch to 5 centuries of hidden history. More significantly, the arrangement preserved Uncle Carlos's mysterious trust in future generations, while ensuring that the deeper secrets he had protected would finally serve their intended purpose of advancing historical knowledge while preserving family heritage. Jake's phone rang with Elena's number, his sister calling with news that completed the transformation of his situation from crisis to opportunity. "Jake, I can't believe how everything has worked out." Elena's voice carried amazement and relief. The National Archives agreement not only saved the ranch, but created opportunities we never could have imagined. Have you seen the preliminary media coverage about the discovery? News outlets across the Southwest were reporting on Jake's discovery as one of the most significant Spanish colonial archaeological finds in decades. Academic institutions were requesting collaboration on research programs. Documentary filmmakers were proposing historical recreation projects, and tourism officials were discussing heritage trail development that could bring visitors to the region where Spanish explorers had conducted secret mining operations. More importantly, Elena continued, the legal precedent we've established protects private property owners who discover historically significant materials while ensuring such discoveries serve public benefit. Rebecca Chen says it could influence cultural property law for decades. As Jake walked across his ranch that evening, watching sunset light paint the distant mountains, the same golden color that had inspired Spanish explorers nearly 5 centuries earlier, he felt the profound satisfaction of having honored Uncle Carlos's trust while preserving both family heritage and historical truth. The ranch that had seemed like a financial burden threatening to destroy him, his future had revealed itself as stewardship of discoveries that connected personal legacy to broader human understanding of exploration, survival, and the complex relationships between past and present. The irrigation ditch where everything had begun was now marked as an archaeological site where visitors could learn about Spanish colonial exploration while understanding how historical discoveries could emerge from routine activities when approached with curiosity and respect for the land's deeper meanings. Uncle Carlos's gun safe, which had protected centuries-old secrets through decades of uncertainty, now held copies of the documents alongside modern legal agreements that ensured those secrets would serve their intended purpose of advancing knowledge, while preserving the family's connection to land that had been entrusted to their care. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Santos. Preliminary translation completed. Your documents describe mining operations that produced over 2,000 pounds of gold and silver, hidden in multiple locations around your ranch. Archaeological survey begins next month. History is being rewritten because your family preserved what others would have destroyed. The message confirmed that Jake's discovery would continue revealing its significance for years to come, providing ongoing opportunities for research, education, and economic development that would sustain both the ranch and the community for generations. As stars emerged in the clear desert sky, the same stars that had guided Spanish explorers across this landscape centuries earlier, Jake felt the deep satisfaction of having transformed burden into purpose, crisis into opportunity, and family obligation into historical contribution. The discovery that had begun with a broken irrigation ditch had become proof that when we approach inherited responsibilities with determination and wisdom, we often find that apparent burdens carry possibilities beyond our imagination, connecting us to purposes larger than individual concerns, while serving both personal needs and broader human understanding. Uncle Carlos's mysterious stories about Spanish secrets and family responsibilities had proven to be more than folklore. They were preparation for exactly the moment when Jake would need the wisdom and commitment to balance historical truth, family heritage, institutional pressure, and personal integrity in decisions that would serve both immediate needs and generational legacy. The ranch that had once seemed like financial suicide had become a bridge between past and present, proving that some inheritances carry value that transcends economic calculation, connecting us to truth that serves both personal purpose and human knowledge when approached with the respect and determination such discoveries demand. 12 months after his discovery, Jake Rodriguez stood before a crowd of international historians, government officials, and media representatives gathered for the dedication of the Rodriguez Spanish Colonial Research Center, established on his family's ranch through the partnership with the National Archives. The Research Center, built around the original stone foundations where Uncle Carlos had preserved centuries-old secrets, now served as a model for how private historical discoveries could advance public knowledge while preserving family heritage and providing sustainable economic development for rural communities. Archaeological excavations based on the Spanish colonial maps had confirmed multiple mining sites around the ranch, yielding artifacts and geological evidence that fundamentally changed scholarly understanding of Spanish colonial exploration. In the American Southwest, discoveries had generated international academic attention while providing ongoing research opportunities that sustained both the ranch operations and the local community. What began as an effort to save a failing ranch, Jake told the assembled audience, became an opportunity to preserve historical truth that had been waiting nearly 5 centuries for someone with the wisdom to understand its significance. Uncle Carlos taught me that land carries responsibilities beyond ownership, and that some secrets reveal themselves only when we're prepared to honor both their historical importance and their contemporary relevance. The applause that followed reflected recognition not just of Jake's discovery, but of his family's generations of stewardship that had preserved archaeological sites and historical materials till they could serve their intended purpose of advancing human understanding while sustaining the land and community that had protected them. As the ceremony concluded and visitors toured the research facilities where Spanish colonial documents were being studied by scholars from around the world, Jake reflected on how completely his life had been transformed by a simple decision to repair an irrigation ditch rather than abandon the land that seemed like an impossible burden. The ranch that had threatened to destroy his future had become the foundation for a life purpose that connected agricultural sustainability, historical preservation, academic research, and community development in ways that served both personal fulfillment and broader social benefit. Uncle Carlos's legacy lived on, not just in the documents he had preserved, but in the wisdom he had passed down about approaching inherited responsibilities with the patience and determination necessary to discover their deeper significance. The treasure Jake had ultimately found wasn't the gold and silver described in Spanish colonial mining records, but the understanding that when we commit to honoring the past while serving the future, we often discover purposes that transform apparent burdens into extraordinary opportunities for contributing to something larger than ourselves. Sometimes the greatest discoveries emerge not from seeking treasure, but from the wisdom to recognize that the land beneath our feet, the responsibilities we inherit, and the challenges that seem impossible may carry possibilities that change everything when approached with the courage to see beyond immediate circumstances to the larger purposes they might serve. Jake Rodriguez's discovery continues to yield new insights into Spanish colonial exploration while providing a model for how individual discoveries can serve both personal and public benefit. His story proves that sometimes the most valuable treasures are not gold or silver, but the wisdom to recognize that inherited responsibilities often carry opportunities beyond our imagination when approached with determination, integrity, and respect for both historical truth and contemporary needs. The Spanish colonial documents discovered on the Rodriguez Ranch are now considered among the most significant historical finds in the American Southwest, providing evidence that continues to reshape understanding of early European exploration, while demonstrating how private discoveries can advance public knowledge when managed with appropriate wisdom and legal guidance. If this story has inspired you, please subscribe to our channel and share it with others who understand that the most valuable discoveries often emerge when we approach inherited challenges with the patience and determination to uncover their deeper significance. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. This one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Or don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.